Along with The Office and Parks and Rec and It's Always Sunny, Seinfeld is one of many great sitcoms that didn't quite find its feet in its first season. When you go back and watch the first season now, it plays like an early, underdeveloped version of the Seinfeld we know and love. Some of the creases had to be ironed out in subsequent seasons, and those creases stick out like a sore thumb on a rewatch. From George's career as a real estate agent to Claire, the main character who never was, everyone forgets these key details from Seinfeld Season 1. Kramer starts out with a different name. Larry David famously based the character of Jerry's eccentric neighbor Cosmo Kramer on his own eccentric neighbor, Kenny Kramer. But before he decided to just use Kramer's real name for the character, David named the character Kessler. In the pilot episode, Michael Richards appears as the character we now know as Kramer, but he's called Kessler. The show didn't acknowledge this inconsistency until the final season. In Seinfeld's revolutionary reverse chronological episode, The Betrayal, the final flashback took us back to Jerry and Kramer's first meeting. Jerry mistakenly thinks Kramer is called Kessler, because of a mix-up in the building. Jerry and Elaine's breakup is still fresh in Season 1. Jerry and Elaine's unique relationship in Seinfeld subverted the usual male-female dynamic of American sitcoms. In shows like Cheers and Friends, the male and female leads were friends who might become lovers. But in Seinfeld, they were lovers who decided to just be friends. Jerry and Elaine's romantic past paved the way for some hilarious storylines, like their friends with benefits deal and the revelation that Elaine faked all her orgasms when they were together. But, in keeping with Seinfeld's no hugging, no learning policy, Jerry and Elaine rarely spoke about their feelings for each other. The show never wanted viewers to think there was a chance they would get back together, or get emotionally involved in their relationship, and the series finale even subverted that expectation with a wink to the audience. So, when you go back and watch Season 1, it's weird to see just how much the breakup is weighing on their fledgling friendship. When the series begins, Jerry and Elaine have only recently broken up, so the wounds are still fresh. Jerry is reluctant to ask Elaine for another woman's number, or even discuss his dates with her. Jerry and Elaine would later talk openly about each other's relationships, introduce each other to their partners, and even set each other up on dates, with varying degrees of success, ranging from man hands to he took it out. Claire the waitress disappears after one episode. Seinfeld's pilot episode introduces a major character to the main cast who is mysteriously never heard from again. The pilot starts off with a familiar sight, Jerry and George sitting opposite each other in a New York coffee shop, discussing the mundane minutiae of everyday life, but then, they're joined by an unfamiliar face, Claire the waitress, played by Lee Garlington. The episode insinuates that Claire is good friends with Jerry and George, but we never see her again. They never even mention her again. It's not uncommon for cast members to be fired or replaced after shooting a pilot episode, but the series makes no attempt to explain away her sudden disappearance. There were a lot of stand-up segments in Season 1. While Seinfeld has proven to be one of the most timeless sitcoms of the 90s, and almost all of its storylines are just as funny today as they were when the episodes first aired, one part of the show that's aged pretty badly is the opening and closing stand-up segments. They're classic nightclub comedy routines, and since Jerry Seinfeld had to generate so many minutes worth of jokes every season, very little of it is amaterial. Seinfeld and David originally pitched Seinfeld as a show about how a comedian gets his material. The events of an episode's plot would inform Jerry's stand-up act when he went up on stage that weekend. In Season 1, they really leaned into this conceit, and they wedged in a stand-up set in between every other scene. But as the show found its feet, the stories stood on their own and the stand-up sequences were confined to the cold open and the tag. The show eventually phased out the stand-up completely. By the time Seinfeld took over as head writer, the stand-up segments went the way of the dodo, because he didn't have time to run the show on his own and write a few minutes of material for the beginning and end of every single episode, although the cold opens in those later seasons were often just stand-up bits in dialogue form. Jerry had the same girlfriend for multiple episodes. There have been plenty of social media posts calculating just how many people Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer dated over the course of Seinfeld's 9 seasons. Whereas shows like Friends and Cheers would introduce long-running love interests for multi-episode, sometimes multi-season, arcs, Seinfeld almost never brought back a love interest for a second episode, because it usually only took one episode for these characters to ruin a relationship. But in Season 1, Jerry had the same girlfriend for multiple episodes. He started going out with a woman named Vanessa in The Stakeout, and he was still dating her a few episodes later in The Stock Tip. According to the inside look on the DVD bonus features, Larry David decided to bring back Vanessa because The Stock Tip called for a girlfriend character, and they'd given Jerry a girlfriend a few episodes earlier and never mentioned a breakup, so it made sense that they would still be together. It happened a couple of times later in the series, where a love interest would appear in 2 or 3 episodes, or, in the case of Susan Ross, stick around for a season-long engagement with a morbid twist ending. But most of the time, the characters get brand new partners at the start of every episode. That season 1 logic of continuing a relationship that hadn't explicitly ended on screen wasn't carried through to the subsequent seasons. George was a real estate agent. Throughout Seinfeld's lengthy 9-season run, George Costanza switched between a wide variety of careers. He was like Homer Simpson, bouncing from job to job, leaving chaos and calamity in his wake. He briefly worked at Pendant Publishing before he was caught having sex with the custodian on his desk. He briefly worked as a hand model before